Hello, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about my March reading wrap up. And so I have all of my stats here in my bullet journal, and we're just going to talk about all of the books that I read in March. So March was a pretty good reading month for me, honestly. All of my books were either 3 or 5 stars this month. That's pretty unheard of for Lena. That being said, 2 of those 5-star reads were rereads, but I've been letting myself reread more books this year because they just make me happy, and if it's a book that I love, why not read it again? I am a firm believer in rereading, especially if you're in a reading slump. And if you hear some crunching, it is Indy, my Havanese, over here chewing on a bone. So if you hear that little crunch crunch, just ignore it. Okay, first let's talk about the 3-star books that I read. First being Only If You're Lucky by Stacey Willingham. I got this from Book of the Month. I read it physically and I gave it 3 stars. And I read this because of my friend Jesse's book club, the Sleep When I'm Dead book club. I was a co-host this month along with my friend Jordan from the channel Sorry Book Solid. And so I will link the live show. It's already happened, but I will link it so you can go back and hear all of my thoughts. Basically, this is about some college students and their roommate is murdered. And so they're trying to figure out who killed the roommate, and it is multiple timelines, so you're going back and forth in time to see like last year in college, before they were in college, you're seeing when she was alive and now. So there's some frat parties, there's some hazing, and it was all around a good time. I didn't love it, but I definitely think that it's a good mystery, especially for somebody who is like maybe getting into thrillers or likes that kind of new adult age range of college. I went to a small private college and I didn't really get to do a lot of partying because I had to work multiple jobs while I was going to school, so I couldn't really relate to the college experience a whole lot, but other people did say that they were able to on the discussion, and overall people seem to enjoy the book for the most part. Although I think if I wanted to recommend Stacey Willingham to somebody, I would recommend her other books over this one. The next 3-star book I read was My Husband by Maud Ventura, and this was actually recommended to me by a coworker, and I was a little bit hesitant because it does say that it has been translated from French, and usually translated works for me are not the best, but this is written as if you're reading like a woman's diary. You're like in her head, and she is like obsessed with her husband, and you don't actually get to know anybody's name during the book. She keeps referring to him as my husband, my husband, my husband, and she's like a little bit of a psychopath, and she's kind of crazy, and the things that she says and like these weird obsessions that she has surrounding her husband are pretty intense. And I read this for the backlist readathon, so I do talk about my thoughts in there, but it's a quick read. I read it on a quick 2-hour flight, and it has a really good twist at the end. Next we have Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson, and this one I have seen go around booktube and bookstagram, and I've heard talked about fairly frequently, but people say it was weird, so I was a little bit hesitant, but I read this because of a challenge that I was doing in my Facebook book club. One of the prompts was literally just to read this book, and so I found it on Everand and thought maybe I should pick it up. And this is about a woman who gets a letter from a friend that she met when she was in like a boarding school in high school, and it basically says like, hey, I really need you to come. I have a job opportunity. It's pretty secretive. Just come and I'll tell you about it. And her friend is really rich in the South, married to a politician, and the job is for her to nanny the kids from the man's first marriage. And the only catch is that the kids randomly catch on fire. Nobody knows why or how, but whenever they get upset or super emotional, they catch on fire. And that's pretty much all I knew about it, and that's essentially all that happens. You're basically following them as she's nannying these kids this summer, and it was a nice relationship. She doesn't know much about kids, and so she's basically figuring it out. And these kids are pretty traumatized because of their weird thing that they have and losing their mother, and so it was like kind of a nice story, but I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of character development. I wanted more. And then the ending just kind of fell flat. So that's why I gave that 3 stars. And it was weird, but not as weird as everybody says. And then my last 3-star read is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. And this one I gave 3 stars because I feel like it is an important book and I feel like people should read this book, but the writing style was just way too much for me. It was so descriptive. There was no need for this book to be as long as it was. It could have been cut down so much because of how descriptive it was. But essentially, it's about a boy who is committed to 6 months in this school for boys, and it's about all of the horrors that happen there. And it is based on a true story of the Dozer School for Boys in Florida that was shut down because of abuse and neglect of the boys there in the facility. White and black boys that were killed there, and nobody really knew what happened or why, or they told their families what happened, but they weren't buried properly, they didn't have markers. And so all of these people that were just kind of lost to society and kind of thrown away, and horrible, horrific things happened at the Dozer School. And so I was really looking forward to this book, but I just couldn't get over all of the descriptive, and the writing style was just too difficult for me. But I do think that it's an important story. It is pretty graphic, definitely look up trigger warnings. But there was also like a little bit of a paranormal aspect that I just had a hard time connecting with. If you want to learn about the Dozer School for Boys, I have read some nonfiction stories about it, and I felt like I learned a lot. And so I would definitely look into the history of it if you're interested. But I am rating this one 3 stars because I do think that it's an important piece of history that a lot of people don't know about, and a lot of horrific things happened to the boys that were put there, and society didn't do right by them, and I think that they need to be talked about and their names need to be known, but it was just a really hard book to read. Okay, let's move on to the 3 5-star books that I read. 2 of them were rereads, so we'll talk about those first. First book that I reread was The Lost Girls of Willowbrook by Ellen Marie Wiseman. We all know this is one of the best books of all time, and the first time I read Willowbrook, I read the ARC physically, but now the audiobook is out, and so I wanted to experience that, so I got it from Libby. And this is about Sage and Rosemary, and they're twins, and Sage learns that her twin sister Rosemary was committed to Willowbrook a few years ago, and she didn't even know. She was told that her twin sister died. But now Rosemary has gone missing from Willowbrook, so Sage takes it upon herself to go to Willowbrook and try to find her. But when she gets to Willowbrook, they mistake her for her twin sister, and she ends up being committed. And Willowbrook was a real place in New York, and a lot of horrific things happened there, ended up being shut down. There's a lot of documentaries and a lot of history around Willowbrook if you're interested. And this was based on real events. It's based on real people. It's based on real rumors of a serial killer that took place during that time. And it has a little bit of everything. It's set in the 70s, so it has a little bit of historical fiction, a little bit of thriller, a little bit of serial killer vibes. It's just so good, and I highly recommend picking it up. And then the other reread was The Lost Girls by Heather Young. And this is 2 timelines, the first of which being a modern day timeline where a woman named Justine and her 2 daughters are kind of down on their luck. They've left an abusive relationship because she learned that her aunt actually passed away and left her a cottage on a lake in northern Minnesota. So they decide to go there. So once they get to northern Minnesota to this lake house, they start learning about some things that happened and some secrets. And then the other timeline is Lucy, the old woman, telling Justine the story of what happened that summer when their sister disappeared through journals. There's some mystery, there's some found family, there's hardship, there's secrets, but it was just really good. I have always loved this book. This is probably the 4th time I've reread this book. I don't know what it is. I just love the vibes of hearing about a summer back in the 50s and what it was like for well-to-do families in Minnesota to go to the lake, and what their little sister disappearing did to that town and all of the families that would go to those summer homes, and how many secrets ripped apart a family over time. So good. Definitely look into it and see if it's something you'd be interested in, but highly recommend. And then the last 5-star book I'm going to talk about is The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon, and this was also so good. I read it for the backlist readathon, and I will link my vlog down below so you can see all of my thoughts, but essentially this is about a midwife in the 1700s in Massachusetts, and she has to help essentially solve the mystery of a man's murder. A man's body was found and he was accused of rape, and so this woman needs to take her journal entries from when she delivers babies and when she also does other medical care for people in the town, as she has a lot of experience. It gave vibes of Outlander, it gave vibes of Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, which those 2 are some of my favorite shows. Her relationship with her husband was so well written, and at the end the author actually reads excerpts from the actual diary. So there is another book about the same woman based on her journal entries of this midwife. I will put the name of the book on the screen if you're interested in learning more. But when I have talked about this book, I've heard people say, like, oh yeah, I read this book that's based on the same woman's journal entries. I just couldn't put this one down. It was long, but it didn't feel long. Okay, those are all of the books that I read in March. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what did you think of them. And if you haven't read any of these books, then what was your favorite book for March? Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!